Good morning, I'm Chris Fox, and today we're going to talk about the power of your backlist, and we're going to go over how that backlist can keep you afloat between new releases. When I first started doing this, I was focused on the new releases to the exclusion of all else. I needed to make the launches as big as possible and get those books out as fast as possible. But the longer I do this, the more I realize that if I'm going to do it sustainably, I've got to put some time, effort, and very careful attention into my backlist. And what that enabled me to do is to survive for about 6 months without putting out a new book, and we're going to show you that in the last segment of the video. The next segment of the video, it's going to be a bit of a digression. It talks a little bit about my life and what's led me here and why I needed the 6 months off. So I don't normally do these asides, but I think today it does fit the topic and it will be useful for you to see sort of how I got from where I was to where I am. So without further ado, let's jump into that segment of the video, and then we'll get to the last segment where we can take a look at how my backlist has done for me. Okay, so as I alluded to in the first segment of the video, I took about 6 months off. So 6 months where I did very, very little work. I unplugged from author communities. I basically recharged. And the reason this is necessary is if you go all the way back to 2010, I was about 70 pounds heavier, maybe 80. I wasn't dating. I lived in a demilitarized zone of a house with, my stoner gamer buddies. And life was bleak in a lot of ways. I wasn't very proud of anything, proud of what I did for a living. I worked in a collections department harassing people for their car payment, making $12 an hour. I had too much debt and no marketable skills. And one day I decided to turn that around and I began the journey that has led me here. And I spent about 5 years becoming a software engineer. I learned how to program for the iPhone and the iPad. I worked every weekend, nights, breaks, mornings, every spare minute that I possibly could. It took me 18 months to go from writing my first program to getting a job doing it. And then there was another frenetic period of 3 years where I worked for these companies inventing what they told me to invent. So every day I'd come into work and they would say, okay, Chris, today you need to figure out how to get the iPhone or the iPad to do this. And I would do that. And this job was, as it turned out, emotionally draining on a lot of levels. Everyone's heard stories about startups. They are as brutal as you hear. It's exhausting work. So why is this all relevant to you and to a backlist? Well, I pushed long enough and hard enough that I burned out. I went full-time as an author in February of 2016. And the very first thing that I did was kick this channel off with the 21-day novel challenge. I cranked out Destroyer in 3 weeks, and then I cranked out the sequel Void Wave, and I cranked out the third book in the trilogy Eradication. I did this very quickly, and this came on the heels of 5 years of intense work. So by the time I reached August of 2016, I was just exhausted. I was broken. I was burnt out, and I needed a break. I just needed a break. I couldn't do this at the pace that I was doing it anymore. And all of that kind of built up pressure that I'd accumulated from my time as a software engineer, it finally had come home to roost, and I needed some time off. So I hiked the John Muir Trail, and I took some time to get married, and I flew to Hawaii for 2 weeks. And instead of writing the next book to market, like would have been the smart financial thing to do, I ended up writing a book called The Great Pack. It was the 4th book in my Deathless series, which doesn't sell very well, but it was a book from my heart. It's a story that I'm loving and that I want to finish, and I will eventually finish. And so I took the chance to write that. And I knew that it wouldn't sell very many copies, and I wasn't surprised when it didn't. I just barely earned back the production cost, but it took almost 6 months from release to do that. Whereas the rest of my books usually pay for their launches within a week or two. I was only able to do this, to actually take the break to write The Great Pack and take the break to go to Hawaii and have my wedding and do the John Muir Trail and do all these things because of my backlist. Because I had built a steady revenue stream so that even though I'm not putting out new books, I'm still making a living wage. And we're going to show you in the final segment of the video exactly how that looks, like where the money's coming in and how it goes down over time, and I'll show you where the new releases are. So let's jump into that segment of the video and we'll get a look at my backlist. Okay, so what you're seeing here is Book Report, which you can check out if you're curious at getbookreport.com. It attaches to your Amazon earnings. and pulls them into this nice pretty graph to show you kind of how you're earning. And you can change the time increment here, although I'm doing all time, so you can get a look at sort of how things have gone for me. And this doesn't include things like audiobooks or pen and paper books or anything else that I'm selling. This is just ebooks, but that's almost 70% of my income. So I think it gives you a pretty pure picture of how my overall income goes. So you can look at how things took off, like right back here in April of 2016, this is where I put out Destroyer. So this is my first written to market book, and as you can see, it did very, very well. The next book, even though I didn't have a new release, it was still taking off. Amazon was peddling it to everybody under the sun, happily selling my book. And then in June, I released the next book in the series, Void Wraith. So I got another couple good months there. But then you can see, here we are, 60 days later, sales fall dramatically. I'm already off that 60-day sales cliff for Void Wraith, and I'm starting to lose sales very quickly. So the next month I get Eradication out, that props sales back up, but then you can see it falls again. And this is where the discussion of Backlist comes in. Because around now, October of 2016, is when I took my foot off the gas and I stopped working so hard. And you can see that sales continue to fall, and each month they're dropping down a little bit. But over the period of 6 months, they're still in a livable area. So here we are, $7,600 after 6 months of not putting out a book. And when you add in my audio and paperback sales, I am still hitting $10,000 a month. I'm still having 5 figures, even though it's been 6 months since I put out a book. Then we get into month 7. And in this month, I actually stopped all of my ads. I turned them all off to see how effective they were and what was happening. I wanted to get a truer picture. And I rebuilt my ads from scratch. So you can see that was the worst month ever. And even though it had been 6 months since I put out a book, and even though I stopped doing much advertising, I still made pretty good money. So there's this constant downward pressure. But if you are using intelligent advertising, if your books link to each other in a way that a fan reads the first book, and then they learn about the second and the third and the next series, and you're sort of leading them around your backlist, you can still be making a living doing this. And then, of course, in May, those of you who followed 12 Weeks to a Trilogy, I put out a couple of new books. In June, I put out a couple of new books. I'm on track to have a great July. But it is going to go down. It's going to keep going down until I get out a new series. So I've got a mix of those big new release spikes and then that long tail because I'm doing some advertising and clever promotion on my backlist. That backlist enables me to stay afloat when I need to do things like recharge, when I do burn out. So while I think it's really important to focus on these big release months when you're putting out those titles, it is also important to think about your backlist and how that's being managed. And yes, I did just release a book that'll teach you to do that. It is free in Kindle Unlimited. You're welcome to check it out. If not, I'll be doing a couple more videos going over some of the more salient points, and we'll take a look at sort of how you can manage your backlist. And I'm just going to make companion videos that go along with the book to give a little bit more detail on that. Anyway, hopefully this gives you a little bit of an idea of what you can do with a backlist and sort of how you can cover your butt when you're burnt out and you just can't write. Because at the end of the day, guys, we are creatives and you are going to need to take breaks. If you push yourself too hard, you're going to burn out and you're going to need to recover from that. And your backlist is the vehicle that'll let you do that. So hopefully this was useful. If it was or if it wasn't, please let me know in the comments. And I'm going to get back to the writing.